Hello again. My name is Sam Robinson, and this is the Agnostic Syncretist podcast. Thank you for joining me. And today we are going to go over some old material and some new material. And the old material is the fact that I'm going to go back over the 7 subtle bodies or 7 principles as presented from the actual mystery school tradition, which would either be Rosicrucian, Theosophy, Anthroposophy, or the Kabbalah. And that's, you could probably find this in the East as well. But the point being, the esoteric or occult mystery school traditions are the primary source for this information. And they have extreme delineations about the 7 principles or 7 subtle bodies and how to interact with them, how to experience them, how to develop them, and the reasons why we do those things or why you would spiritually develop those principles. But in conjunction with those 7 principles, they also relay how they fit in to the human spiritual evolutionary cosmology that they all teach. And it's a very vast scheme, no matter which tradition. And it's always the same scheme, though sometimes they use different terminology in the scheme. It's the same scheme. So the 7 principles are fundamentally attached and aspects of the evolution of the cosmology for humans. And it goes in different phases. So you develop a principle and gain a principle in each phase of development. And so to speak, as we spiritually evolve from pure spirit down into materiality, where we are now, very dense materiality in the 3D plane. Prior to that, as a being, we didn't necessarily have all these principles. We acquired them. We developed them over time, over vast aeons of time. And each one was fundamental to experiencing that phase of cosmic evolution, because to make it even more interesting, we develop these principles that we all call the subtle bodies in conjunction with phases of evolution and our actual sphere that we live on, Earth, which are called rounds, and they're in a chain. There's 7 Earths in each chain, and there's 7 rounds. We've gone through 3 rounds, and we're on the 4th globe in the 4th round of this evolutionary scheme. And it's very complex, and so I'm going to try to make it simple today. So I'll use the Rosicrucian terminology. There are globes of the Earth, and they're essentially what you could just refer to as phases of an Earth incarnation while we're on it. So whatever density the Earth is the density that we are in. Thus, in the past, prior to today, if we go back in the evolutionary scheme, very far back, the Earth was in a state that was non-physical, and so were we. And we had less principles. We had less bodies because we didn't need those bodies yet for those phases. We acquired them in each phase to today because they became necessary to actually experience and interact with the environmental sphere of the Earth in that density throughout each stage. So each principle became part and parcel of how we interacted with our own environment in every phase. They were necessary to even experience it. And it was gradual and it was slow. But at the same time, it was fundamental to actually evolving as a being spiritually. And when I say spiritually, I'm really referring to the substance of our body specifically. Obviously, there's internal moral spiritual development, and then there's the actual development of the various substances that make up our body: astral, etheric, mental, soul-like, or akasha, and the spirit. And the spirit is simply referred to in most of these as the monad, or the divine spark, a, a mirrored reflection or array of the divine absolute principle that is unmanifested, is reflected in, and that is then ensouled in a vehicle, which is our physical body. At the beginning, it was not physical, but it was the vehicle for this spark of the divine. And it's complicated, but essentially we existed in, and not to mention just us, our environment existed in a state of vibration that was far removed from 3D physical reality. The earth wasn't physical or 3D, and neither were we. And thus we didn't need all 7 principles at the time. We had, in the beginning, we only had the highest principle and the lowest principle. We had our physical body, though it was not actually, so to speak, physical at the time. It's all relative. It was physical for then, because it was a different phase of evolution and a different state of existence that we lived in at the time. You wouldn't be able to see it being visible to us right now. And the monad is ensouled into that vehicle in the beginning, and we go through the stages of the earth incarnation along with our own incarnations as we develop. So that's kind of the breakdown of the scheme in a very short, brief overview. It gets complicated. So every earth is called a globe, and it goes through what's called a round. A round is 7 incarnations of the earth, where it falls deeper into matter and becomes more dense in each stage. But it's on, like, it's on an arc, basically, where it's dropping down. So it's like in a U. And you have, in each round, you have 7 Earths. And there are, so to speak, 7 entire rounds. So they all often call this the 7 times 7 times 7 incarnations. So the very first round was in an era of the universe so far removed from physicality that we can barely comprehend it, really, as humans, and it's extremely abstract, and it was extremely rarefied in its consistency as a substance and vibration, nowhere near physical. And the Earth goes through those phases. We went through those phases on each Earth. So Earth changes density, we change with that density. And in the Rosicrucian terminology, they give names to these different, so to speak, epochs of these globes and of these rounds. So in the first epoch, it's called the Saturn epoch. The second epoch is the Sun epoch. And the third epoch is the Moon epoch. And then we're in the fourth epoch, called simply the Earth epoch, or the Mars/Mercury epoch. These are phases of involution. Evolution only begins once we reach the phase we're in now, and then we evolve back out of matter, starting now, so sort of. We're now in the upward swing of this arc to re-spiritualize with the Earth and develop along with it. It's going to re-spiritualize in the sense it will become less dense, and it will go back to an etheric state. It will rise out of matter. And we, if we spiritually evolve properly, will also rise out of matter by etherizing our body and spiritually evolving. But before that, in the very beginning, we only had a physical body that was of a substance that was essentially astral. You could say spiritually astral, and you just had the divine spark. You had no mind, you had no mental body, you didn't have an etheric body, and you did not have an astral body at all. You were like a astro-etheric blob without with barely a shred of consciousness to its name, and just a divine spark. And that's where it begins. And this is fundamentally different. And the reason I'm going into this is because today, in the 21st century and in the 2020s, what we've seen, the absolute rise and popularity of what's called the New Age teachings, the UFO cosmology, almost ancient aliens cosmology, and all this nonsense online, which don't give you the esoteric mystery tradition, cosmology, or origin story. They barely give you the bare bones of what they call the higher subtle bodies at all. And when they do, they distort it, they warp it, they misconstrue it, they mischaracterize it, and they don't explain it in the context that it needs to be explained and understood, which is within a cosmological aspect. Because every single principle of the seven evolved for a phase of existence for humanity to experience. So they were necessary for each stage. And one very old and well-known axiom in the esoteric mystery tradition is a very simple one, and it states that a mineral becomes a plant becomes an animal becomes a man becomes a spirit becomes a demigod, and a demigod then becomes a god. So this is a short, singular sentence that basically is expressing the various states of incarnation that all beings go through. They go through a mineral state, they go through a plant state, they go through an animal state, and they get to the state where now the human state, and we're supposed to, and obviously in the future, swing up into basically the angelic state or the spirit state. And really, these aren't. It's not that you were a mineral. You had a mineral-like consciousness. You had a plant-like consciousness. You had an animal-like consciousness. Now we have a human-like consciousness. And the spiritual development of humanity and the spiritual awakening is about developing the spirit-like consciousness. That is what we're here to do today in this time period, and why this spiritual awakening is even happening is for that reason. And at the same time, there are dark occult orders and left-hand path schools that have this information, just like the Theosophy schools do, or the Anthroposophical ones, which are called the right-hand schools. And they don't really want humanity to understand this information. They'd much rather you never understand it, and to a large degree have funded, created, or pushed algorithmically all sorts of information that deviates individual seekers of truth and spiritual seekers away from that information as much as they possibly can. So only a handful of people out there really talking about this from the actual occult traditional school narratives and from their perspective, which is the right-hand white magic schools of occultism, like Theosophy. And that was the main reason that this information was released to the public by Helena Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner, and it was controversial at the time. They formed what we call sort of an open mystery school. And, for all it's worth, it did good things, and it's also done bad things in a certain sense. It's in the sense that it lost its way to a degree after the founders were gone. But they still help us today. And that information is still out there, yet not many people refer to it when you look this stuff up on for video content. I mean, you'll have 1 million people on Ancient Aliens, 1 million people talking about galactic councils and out-of-body experiences, and blue avians and or Pleiadians and Ancient Aliens, and people like Billy Carson, David Wilcock, the Ancient Aliens community, Gaia TV. They are all misdirections, all of them, either because they're opportunists and capitalists, or because they're shills and their job is to deviate you away from the esoteric tradition, from finding it at all. And so what I want to do today is try to give an overview of what the actual esoteric mystery school traditions teach about the subtle bodies in relation to the phases of evolution and our human origin cosmology, our spiritual cosmology or occult cosmology, and how they interrelate very specifically, because they're connected, they're fundamentally connected. Each phase of our evolution, going all the way back to the beginning, involved certain subtle bodies being activated and developing in that phase to experience the environment we lived in at the time and each phase gained a pretty much a new subtle body and developed it. And then we get to the next phase, and each one is basically gone through different stages of development. The one that we're in now, in the Mars Mercury epoch, at the deepest level of materiality in the cosmic scheme, we got the mental body. In the Atlantean age, we had the germ of it before that, but the germ rose and started to develop during the Atlantean period, and barely had it at all. The germ was barely in the Lemurian period before that. And now these periods are within our this one phase on this globe, where we've been developing, and where you could basically really start, I guess, history, our actual history, and certainly the physical nature of history, started about halfway through this period of cosmic evolution. Before that, the Earth was in a completely non-physical state, astro-etheric, and basically a super spiritual, rarefied state even before that. And so were we, because we lived in that environment, and the Earth was in those states. So the state of the Earth is fundamental to the state of our own vibratory density that we exist in. So we evolved with the Earth sphere. This is our place of development. This is our environmental sphere for development, and it evolves with us, and we with it. It's fundamental. And you can already see, but the nature of what I'm saying, that this is completely opposed and different than what you would hear on the Gaia channel or on in Ancient Aliens, which always talks about genetic engineering and how aliens are basically are the people that were the gods in our ancient texts, and that everything that's all these amazing, mysterious megalithic structures all over the world that seem far too advanced for the time period to be built by humans. They chalk it all up to aliens. Well, when you read the occult cosmology, it's actually attributed to Atlanteans, basically. It was the Atlanteans, or the remnants, and some of it was just the remnants of the Atlanteans after they were destroyed. But when you read about the Atlanteans and their traditions, as opposed to the nonsense you see online all over the place, the Atlanteans were us. We were the Atlanteans. That was a different phase of our evolution, and we were in different bodies. They were physical. They were a little less physical, but they were physical. Yet they were much larger than our bodies are today. They were giants. And that was fine. That was necessary for the time. They were bigger than we are, which is why you see bigger people in the Anunnaki stuff, because those weren't aliens. Those were Atlanteans. That was the fourth root race, which were much larger than the fifth root race, which we are today. And the Atlanteans, supposedly, according to the Secret Doctrine and Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner, they were basically up to 12 feet tall, at the least. And so when you know that, the idea of ancient aliens is being a necessity to explain these megalithic structures that have these stones that weigh up to 50 tons or more. They're incredibly heavy and seem impossible to move without what? Technology. So they use technology to explain this, and the only way you could have that explanation is through a form of alien technology and aliens that brought it to us, because we don't have that technology. Well, what did we have? We had extremely large individuals who had an advanced culture. Actually, the Atlanteans had an extremely advanced culture, and they could easily make these things. It would not be difficult. And that completely destroys the ancient aliens narrative by showing it actually was us and not aliens. It was just a different version of us. It's a different phase of our evolution that is over with and done. But their remains are all over the place of that civilization. And they also, gave us a lot of this mystery and this early mystery school traditional knowledge. And they were the gods because they seemed like gods to the fifth root race after Atlantis fell, and Atlantis came and interacted, because the root races do kind of there's crossover. It's not like one ends and then another begins. That there's some left over as the other one comes into existence, so to speak. And so the fifth root race ran into the fourth root race. The fourth root race, which is the Atlanteans, taught us all sorts of knowledge that they had from their culture that was destroyed. After they spread out and went in different directions, their priests and who was left basically brought us culture, brought us agriculture, brought us technology, brought us knowledge. And that's why you see all this in ancient tablets and ancient stories and ancient architecture. It's not because it was aliens. So that's the fundamental difference. And that is information specifically from the mystery school traditions. And you find it in the Secret Doctrine. You find it in the Rosicrucian Cosmic Conception. You find it in the books by Rudolf Steiner and Esoteric Christianity. And what you do not find it in is any of the extremely popular New Age nonsense out there, or any of the Ancient Aliens or Gaia Channel nonsense out there that is basically completely taken over all the entire sphere of alternative spirituality content. And there's not many content creators talking about this. There's Gigi Young, Mark Passio, Dark Journalist, some David Icke and Archaix and some other people. But not a whole lot. I mean, you could go to the Theosophical Society, but I mean, they don't have a huge presence online. They have a channel, but when it comes to podcasts or content creators, there's very few that go into this. The ones that do, are amazing, like Gigi Young and Mark Passio. And I would check them out. But the point being, it is fundamental to our time period right now that we live in for this information to be understood, because there's a lot of forces out there trying to either misdirect us from these concepts or to literally take them and invert them and represent them to us as a false cosmology story. One based in genetic engineering and cyber technology and transhumanism and scientific materialism. And that is the path to de-evolution. That is the path to disconnect from our subtle bodies and principles that everyone wants to develop. It won't be through technology. It'll be in spite of technology. Because the upward swing of our evolution, spiritual evolution right now, is out of matter, not deeper into matter. That is devolving. That is de-evolution. Putting technology in our bodies is de-evolution. It is falling deeper into materialism, not rising out of it, not etherizing the body. It is mineralizing it instead, actually. And will cut us off from our bodies, our spiritual bodies. Probably, if we go through with that, probably forever. And so that's part of the reason why I think it's so necessary for people to understand the nature of the seven principles and the nature of the esoteric cosmology, because they go hand in hand. So you have there's seven principles, are the body, the ether body, the life principle, the astral body, the mental body, and then you have the spiritual soul called buddhi, and then you have the monad called atma. And atma and buddhi are typically just one thing. It's extremely abstract, but they're not very rarely accessed by anybody today, to put it lightly. So, but this stage of development for humanity in this epoch is the one where we have been developing and have developed the mental body. And the mental body was gained by essentially the later stage of the Lemurian epoch and into the Atlantean epoch. But it was a very germinal state, and only was a slow dawning of what we consider to be waking reasoning consciousness and logic and ratiocination skills, the way we conceptualize and visualize with our reasoning capacity and with using our imagination. That was this phase of development, and we've done great with that phase. We've come very far, but that's the lower part of the mental body. A lot of people put the mental body into two pieces of one body because there's a higher mind and a lower mind, and the lower mind is the logical, critical thinking, use of in reasoning part of the mind. The very physical 3D scientific reality type thinking. Then there's the higher mind, the higher manas, as they call it. And the higher mind is now due to and needs to be developed by humanity. And it involves, higher imagination, intuition, super consciousness, super sensible perception, clairvoyance, parapsychology. And that is why a lot of people are waking up, because that's the phase we're in. That's why a lot of people are waking up. But then there's a lot of pitfalls when you wake up as well that can deviate you or distract you from doing this properly, or even finding the right cosmological narratives to even go with the concepts. Because a lot of times they're not even mentioned by the same people. That most people that talk about psychism don't talk about cosmology. And the people that talk about out-of-body experiences don't talk about all subtle bodies. They just talk about out-of-body experiences. Or the people that talk about ancient aliens don't even really refer to any of those things, but they do give you an origin story that's basically BS. And then there's the New Age people who give you a watered-down pseudo-esoteric version of a lot of these different things. And it's meant to be watered down. Because the New Age has been hijacked by the global elite, very obviously. It was never the intention of Theosophy for this to occur. Blavatsky did not create the New Age teachings. The New Age teachings came about almost 40 years after she died in 1891, and then really, exploded in the 70s and up to today, in the last 50 years. And you've had a lot of people capitalize on it. A lot of people doing astrology, a lot of people doing tarot, a lot of people talking about psychic abilities, a lot of people talking about auras and chakras and, clairvoyance and claircognizance and, doing, palm reading, all these things. None of those things are the actual fundamental focus of the mystery school teachings about our spiritual development. Those are all byproducts of spiritual awakening and development. And that's a very big difference between what you'll find out there in the New Age and what you'll see in the Esoteric Mystery School traditions. Becoming psychic is a byproduct of spiritual development through deep and long-term meditative practices and trying to reach your super consciousness states and your higher consciousness, which is almost, is really more about almost a moral development and moral perspective and an expanded perspective about the world, our environment, about humanity itself, about all the other living things in existence. It's inclusive. It's not exclusive in its perspective change. A lot of the New Age teachings become very individualistic in nature. And most people think they don't have to worry about what's going on in the world or the environment or anything else because they're evolving personally and they're going to be fine. Now, we have to evolve as a species. And we have to evolve along with our sphere of development, which is the Earth, which is right now being saturated. And, different energies from 5G, satellites, to all these other things that are warping the environment and us. So we're being warped and our environment's being warped together at the same time. And that's really hampering our development. And it's in a large way meant to do that by these people that are doing these things, like Elon Musk. He knows exactly what he's doing. He promotes transhumanism all the time. He also is the one launching all these 5G satellites, which are messing up our biospheric energy system of the Earth. It has its own energy and frequencies and aura around it, which is evolving, and we're evolving within it. And well, now it's all distorted because there's so much electricity everywhere. That is a different frequency and different vibration than the Earth. That we're in a sea of, artificial environmental energy fields all around us, and it warps our field too. And so there's a lot of things going on here. But point being, people need to understand this, the significance of the time we're in, the significance of the real esoteric school traditional knowledge, and how it relates to the time period we're in, and why it's necessary to be understood in this time period, and to understand the agendas designed and created and permeating the world right now that are designed to stop all of those things, to stop our development, to slow it down, to invert it, to materialize it, and to keep us easy, complacent sheep able to be controlled without higher consciousness or knowledge of anything. That's the last thing that these dark occult elites want, is that to occur, obviously. And they're doing everything in their power to make sure it doesn't occur. From creating false narratives to, everything that happened the last 4 years. Obviously, if you've been paying attention, you know what I'm referring to. It started in 2020. And everything from, geopolitical and medical and historical events moving right now to the nature of false conceptual frameworks for our origins, for our spirituality and development, for our history. All these things are designed to keep us from real information. They're everywhere. And they're pitfalls for all the seekers that have come awakened spiritually and are looking and searching. And what I want to do is try to provide people with what I've learned through my over a decade of spiritual awakening, and how I avoided and evaded and resisted all the different pitfalls throughout the years, and found my way to the real mystery school tradition and the real hidden wisdom that is only resides within those traditions. So we're going to cover Theosophy and Anthroposophy. We're going to cover Rosicrucianism, and we're going to explain our real origin story. And it's going to be a lot of different videos to do all this, obviously. But I hope you will stick with me, and I hope you will enjoy this journey as we go through our cosmological history as a cosmic being, as we explain the Earth's history, going back into the earlier phases of Earth evolution as a sphere, where it was less dense. And you'll stay with me as we explain how the 7 principles are related to these cosmic phases and were related to the Atlantean and Lemurian civilization periods on the Earth that is within our more recent history. They're fundamental to understanding today, the Atlanteans and the Lemurians, and what those types and states of existences were really like during that time of the Earth period, because they were less dense. There were different abilities they had than we have now. As we gain an ability, we lose an older one as it becomes less necessary for that time period. So the Lemurians were extremely powerful, but had barely any cognizance whatsoever. They did things instinctively. They could manipulate the life force instinctively, yet they couldn't conceptualize. They couldn't count. But they had extraordinary memories. This is just an example. But they could basically manipulate the life force, and they could still see parts of the spiritual realm very easily, which we cannot do today. We're trying to regain those abilities, but they did it instinctively. But they couldn't think. Their mental body was in a germinal state, barely non-existent, and so they couldn't sit there and just conceptualize things like we do our reasoning and thinking today. That the bridge between that was the Atlantean period. In the Atlantean period, they had some of their powers over the life force left, while they had a burgeoning mind at the same time, and they were very powerful. And they had advanced technology, but it's a different type of technology, kind of, because Earth was in a different state. It was a little bit less dense than now, and they still had some sort of natural psychism and abilities that have pretty much gone dormant in the majority of us now. Though now we have all this ability to reason and think and to build things. Yet, of course, building things is